I think I'm not surprised that there is absolute unanimity in the central banking constituency to say that central bank independence is absolutely key. The last episode where we could see the bad consequences of absence of central bank independence was in the occasion of the first oil shock and the second oil shock. So it's a long time ago. I would say since the years 70s and the beginning of the 80s, clearly we have a consensus at a global level that central bank independence is by far the best for our fellow citizens, for the economy, and for the stability and financial and price stability of the entire economies of the world. And there is a very strong consensus on that. I'm not surprised at all to see that the central bank governors, including the governor of Banque de France, Christine Lagarde,
Jean-Claude?
and the Bank of England have, I would say, backed the declaration of J. Powell, the courageous declaration of J. Powell.
Jean-Claude, I'm going to challenge you, and lovely to see you, because I think you have seen this before. I think we've all seen it before in places like Turkey, where President Erdogan basically sacked the central bank governor and decided he knew more about central banking policy and monetary policy than the bankers as well. The consequences were near catastrophic for the Turkish economy as well, and have been wherever politicians have got involved in monetary policy. Does it not need Wall Street and others to point out the potential downside to the US president of his actions?
Yes, of course. And by the way, the declaration of Alan, of Ben, and Janet Yellen on this episode, dramatic episode, I have to say, of relationship between executive branch and the Fed, they say this is how monetary policy is made in emerging markets with weak institutions. And I would really stress weak institutions, because Turkey is clearly a case in point that you are very wisely mentioning. So, of course, you have at the level of some countries, some emerging markets with weak institutions. I'm quoting Alan, Ben, and Janet. Yes, you have seen that. I was speaking of, I would say, the very core of the international monetary system, the very core of the wise central banks. And amongst the wise central banks, you have many emerging markets also with strong institutions. And of course, I am mentioning the advanced economy consensus, which is very strong. You know that there is a de facto consensus to have a definition of price stability amongst the major central banks that are issuing the currencies that are in the basket of the SDR, namely 2% or around 2% in the medium term. So this is very important. We had a consensus since a long period of time, and now we are in a situation where the very important economy and country and democracy, that is the US, is trying to change the game. And it is really absolutely dramatic. It's bipartisan. The opposition was bipartisan. Alan and Ben were appointed by Republicans and Janet by the Democrats. And we have really something which is extremely grave at the global level, not only at the level of the US.
Jean-Claude, you mentioned weak institutions as part of your context for what we have observed in Turkey. That's to Steve's point. How would you characterize the market's perception of U.S. institutions at this stage? Do you think that the market has lost confidence in the U.S. institutions, namely the Federal Reserve as an independent body? And if not, what would cause the market to lose confidence in the Fed as an independent institution?
I think that when you look at day-to-day market, clearly the market has not lost yet I would say, confidence in the U.S. institution. There is clearly a battle which is taking place. J. Powell did exactly what, in my opinion, was the best in the circumstances, with moderation, but very firmly. He expressed his views. And I have to say that nobody yet knows exactly how the Liza Cook issue will go in the Supreme Court, if I'm not misled. Maybe I'm not totally informed, but we see that it is work in progress. And of course, if the Fed loses, if it is clearly to be observed a Federal Reserve that would be the most obedient servant of the executive branch, which is not what is expected in the United States Constitution. The Fed depends, it seems to me, on the Congress, not on the executive branch. So we will have to see exactly what happens. But the situation is extremely grave. And the last statement of Jamie Dimon are also expressing, largely in my opinion, the medium-term sentiment of the market.